Call the meeting to order. 2:07 PM on April 19th. We have a quorum of the joint board in attendance. So we'll move forward with the meeting agenda. Thanks for being here, guys. Minutes, I'm going to table that item. We'll take up both the March and the April minutes at the main meeting. Will be the plan. So we'll move right into legislative update.
Yeah, great. And just some quick housekeeping. Terry called me today. They had a fire at their town hall, so he will not be joining us today. Everyone's okay, but apparently the fire panel melted down and caused a fire. Irony of ironies.
Yeah,
So,
that's embarrassing.
but everyone's okay, but he's dealing with that. And Jane also messaged me, she will not be able to attend today as well. So,
Okay.
So legislatively, we are beyond crossover. You have in front of you the bills that are left alive this session, the broad swath of them that we continue to monitor as they work their way through the process. Over the next few weeks, the legislature's got a couple of deadlines that they've got to meet. So by April 28th, so about 10 days from now, all the bills have got to be reported out by each body. The House has got to deal with all the bills that remain on its docket, and the Senate's got to do the same. Report out of committee, and then by May 5th, the bodies have to act upon them. At that point, then we'll go to committees of conference. May 12th, committee conference week will start. May 19th, then committees of conference will sign off on final conference reports. And then May 26th, the bodies will then have to act upon the committee conference reports that come to them. So at this point, there's a pretty intense slate of hearings going on over the next 10 days as they work through their backlog on these issues. So a couple of brief notes. One of the bills that we've been following is Senate Bill 344, which is, deals with the ability of public bodies to meet virtually. So the committee came out on that, recommended killing it by a close partisan vote. It was an 11-10 vote coming out of committee. So as that comes to the House floor, there will unquestionably be a floor fight of that and debate that about where that goes. But it remains alive. It's a close vote coming out of committee. It certainly will not make the consent calendar. And but that's one that we'll see over the next 10 days or so. And then the other bill you may have seen some news coverage on in recent days is Senate Bill 420, which creates some additional funding to what they call the Extraordinary Needs Grant. That came out of committee on a bipartisan unanimous vote, 19-0. Those are funds that will come out of the Education Trust Fund, which is running about a $48 million surplus based on admin services, most recent numbers they have posted to the website. But in any event, other than that, there's bills that we care about, but tangentially, we're monitoring closely, make sure that nothing else of interest, news, or note happens. I'm happy to trying to address any other questions you may have, but that's what's happening for now. There'll be a lot of activity the next 10 to 14 days.
Is there any way procedurally for them to make changes to the budget or take some of that surplus in the education fund and distribute it in an attempt to reduce taxes or whatever?
There's always a way, but I think this bill was designed to do a little bit of that, but not heard any discussion of that right now. But there's always, at least while the legislature's in session. But right now they're focused on cleaning up this slate of bills and a number of others. And they've got some fights ahead of them on some of the other, bills that were not related to us, but that they're focusing on, including the cannabis bill that we have referenced briefly, which is still alive on the Senate side now, having gotten to the House in a very narrow vote.
The 48 million projected surplus in the trust fund, is that with this year's $100 million tax cut? Or is that, which fiscal year is the 48 being generated?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll find out. I'll let you know. I don't have that. So,
HB 1417, that will provide 7.5% for teachers. I know you don't have that listed on the list, but that'll provide a source of revenue to, well, the reason, I should say source of revenue to reduce costs for school districts. Because the state paying 7.5%. We know where that stands now, because it was obviously, when it was submitted by the Representative O'Brien from Nashua, it was to be a permanent situation, whereas Senator Bradley was looking at changing it to be a one-year issue.
right.
And I know that's in the Senate now, I'm not sure where that stands. That'll be a fair amount of money for school districts. And cost diversion.
Was that also for our admin people?
No,
Just
it's police and fire and school.
Police and fire and schools.
School
not
teachers, not for admin staff.
Right.
On the town or city side.
So the Senate had its hearing on it the other day. They've not made a recommendation yet. So, but since you flagged that, I'll report back on where that is.
What number was it?
1417.
Yeah. Yeah, that's Rennie Cushing, prime on that. So, but yeah, that was quite the. I'm looking back at it now and recalling this, but that was quite the fight in the House.
Yes, they called it political gymnastics, how it survived the House over two different, both committees recommended speak to the legislature both times. The floor fight was successful.
Yeah. I'll report back on that.
Then the other one too was the audit for school districts. 239, that hearing, I guess, didn't idea what happened to that executive session.
So which one was that?
SB 239.
Yeah.
Like, it's not on the website yet, I can't find it. It was penalize school districts and municipalities.
Yeah, so it was exec on yesterday. And so we just sent a message out to see what I can find out from my folks. So.
I saw it keep coming up, but I wasn't quite sure what the real impact is. What we find if you know how many school districts and towns don't do their audits.
There's only.
That's to say,
Well,
it could be
it's a matter of having on time. That's the problem.
No, the time.
defined
30 days.
30 days from completion.
It wasn't the close of the year. But it was a specific time frame, and then you notified the DRA if you didn't.
I'll find out.
The most part, I couldn't get a tax return because I haven't got it in. Usually
You can't get a tax rate unless you have the 535, which is to be audit. So there are some towns that are filling out their own. We see them at the bottom. Also a requirement of our bonds. And there are towns.
The reason I asked is that's when they finalize.
I'll find out. I'll let everybody know. And I'll look into 1417 and I'll look into the question on the fiscal year, the surplus that's showing right now.
Okay.
So
Coalition Communications, when we sent out the notice for this meeting, we did ask within the body of the email for information from towns or elected officials who might be interested in serving on the joint board. Not heard anything back.
Not getting responses either.
And I don't know if we want to go out and try to recruit people. I just don't know a lot of elected selectmen or city councilors or whatever that would be interested potentially in serving.
Free for
Yeah. It may be, I don't know when the last time was that you sent out an actual like fiscal communication to members, but it may be an opportunity to provide a brief update and then to formally solicit people. And that way, my guess is you'll get more than you need, but you'll also be able to identify people who are showing an interest here, which wouldn't be a bad thing. So, that doesn't be a long message, but
No,
But usually when you put out an invoice, that catches people's attention, so maybe.
I could use
with the
that to
invoices,
send
right?
out the invoices.
Solicitation. Put on your calendar, the full board. Additional invoice, but
Yeah.
Anything else that we need to communicate in that email?
I think it's what we sent out, we talked about that. Going into a budget year for the state next year. Build up for that. People think,
Right.
this is not an issue, but really, that's what we're at, is the build up for that going into the fall.
With the election and then the budget.
I think you have an opportunity about the election, talk about a budget year, which is always a lot of moving parts. I also know, going back to the legislation for a second, we know that there will be a study committee over the summer. That will look at school funding, that we'll want to be involved in and they'll want to be aware of. Incidentally, I was mentioning deadlines kind of lead up to the end of this session, but then over the summer, October 28th is the date at which all interim study reports have to be prepared and issued. So bills that get sent to interim study and, pushed off till the end of the session, they've got those few months for the end of October that put them out. So that's when we can, that's the end date for that process that we're talking about. So two other things I might mention while we're in communications. Not last week, week before last, I met virtually with Zach Sheehan, who is the new executive director for the New Hampshire's Fairness Project. We talked about trying to connect with them. As we know, they went through a transition at the end of the year. So he is the new person there. We had a very cordial conversation, about half an hour. His background is in Democratic politics. He worked in the, I believe it was the state Senate caucus for a time as a policy advisor. And I guess I would report from that meeting. He wants to be collaborative where he can. I think clearly, the goals of that organization, which he articulated to me, was, I think to be very forthright in advocacy and pushing for, changes to the funding system that, we know that they've talked about publicly. But he also acknowledged that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be opposite us 100% of the time. And one of the points he made is I realized when, community members of your organization, people don't take into account that there are lower income taxpayers in those towns that get hurt, and equity doesn't always, carry them. And so I'm mindful of that as one of the challenges that your folks face, and something that I care about. And so in any event, it was a positive conversation. I won't say there were any major going forward items, except that I think he would welcome the opportunity to speak with us if it made sense at some point. We can talk about that, but they certainly, he talked about their evolution into a more advocacy first organization. We know they've been doing work around the state around their message. I fully expect they'll be involved in the election process this fall in some fashion. So I think it was a diplomatic overture. It was a good conversation, and I think at least opens the door for a further conversation with them should we choose. So, and then with that in mind, sorry.
Before you separate.
Yeah, sure.
Where I imagine they're going to monitor the study committee this summer. Did he indicate what level of involvement, or are they going to just focus on the elections, or?
Did not mention that,
Okay.
but I suspect that they will be deeply involved in it. Deeply involved. That's my characterization, but I'm sure that
They're
like us.
deeply involved in the commission.
Right,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
And so I think it's fair to say that they'll certainly be in the room monitoring it. And again, as we know, the interim study comes out, and then we've got a new legislature come December.
Right.
We don't know yet, we won't know yet until mid-June who's running and who's not. For one, we're going to see retirements that happens every 2 years. That's the filing period, so we'll know by early mid-June who's in and who's out. And then of course, primaries in September, November elections, there'll be some additional shakeout, and that'll impact anyone's policy prescriptions for what they wish to pursue. But I expect that when we go and sit in that conference room, someone from there will be there also. So
Is there any interaction in those meetings?
there can be. I mean, yes, I mean, it's a study committee, so it's up to the chair. And I would expect there'll be opportunities to take information from the public and to take testimony and to have a conversation. I've seen them run it different ways, but I would expect that it will not be a simple process of sitting there and observing. That we will have some opportunity to engage once we have a sense of the scope and what they choose to pursue and things of that nature. We have an idea right now, but that's certainly something we'll want to talk about as we get closer and they get something on the books. My guess is probably sometime in June.
Well, I don't expect it, but have they set a start date?
No, we talked to leadership there, I guess about a week ago now. Nothing yet. So, but I
My
wouldn't-
guess is if they don't start till August, then we know it's not going to be
right.
very productive.
Yeah, we'll see. Right now, this next 3 or 4 weeks is going to be pretty intense for them, and then they'll get down to the brass tacks of starting interim study. I will say, while interim study is a short-term measure to get some relief from the crush of bills you have in the moment, it creates a backlog that they've got to address, and they've interim studied a lot of bills this year. So we'll see. The other item I was going to raise on communications, we had talked about the value of doing a survey of legislators. And so I wanted to just discuss that with you briefly. What my hope is that by at the next meeting, there'll be a draft survey for you to review. You'll have an advance to look at, comment, edit. What I would suggest is a survey that we mail to not only existing legislators, but candidates for office, House and Senate. I don't think we need to do executive counselors, but the House and Senate will be the majority. The incumbents that are returning that we know of, as well as candidates for those offices, so we can, in the event that someone wins out, seeking the return envelope and seeking information on a couple of basic points that we care about to solicit data and use it as a messaging tool. I've talked to a vendor I work with regularly on direct mail pieces, and I think the outside of the universe of mailers would be 1,000, more likely 800 or 850. And the estimate for production, first class mail, and everything all would be $1,500. It's $1,500. I would recommend first class mail versus bulk mail simply because it's going to ensure it gets there in a more timely fashion. And there's a little more of an escalator on that, but not much. But I'll do the heavy lifting on the draft piece, and obviously have you weigh in for your comments and edits. And you know, my goal, and I know we had a conversation about timing, we will know in June who the candidates are, all of them. We could do two things. We could do is, you know, if we wanted to get something out earlier, we could do a mailer simply to elected officials today as they exist. And then a follow-up mailer once we know the other candidates for office, someone who's running in these various districts who isn't elected now but seeks to, which would create two, you know, groups, but soliciting the same information. But if the interest is getting in a little bit earlier in the door, we could do an earlier tranche of the survey. So it won't cost anything, you know, more. I know there was some interest about getting it out a little bit earlier.
But I think we talked about having it early once we knew who was in, saying it now with retirees and, you know, all the shifts that's going on may not be all that productive. But early enough in the campaign season, so we beat the primary and have that.
Oh, yeah, I definitely would want it to be as soon in June as we've identified who the candidates are.
Right, and
As soon
so,
as that's public, I think getting it out to anybody who will be on the ballot, whether they're, you know, whether they make it through
right,
primaries, I think get them on record as early as we can.
so I agree with that. And so if we have a draft in May, we can have it ready to go. And these folks work quickly. So Secretary of State will run a list of names with addresses once all the filings are in. And again, usually it's a 10-day window where those filings occur. So it won't be beyond that kind of mid-June. You know, we could do it and plan it in such a fashion that when that filing period closes on Friday afternoon, you know, we could probably go to print that weekend and then to drop on Monday. Which would mean that with first class mail would hit then that following week, midweek probably.
What do you think, Sean?
Yeah, I think it makes sense to have the list, get the people who actually sign up for office. So I guess the question is, once we get the information, it tells us who's in favor, who's opposed to our position, then what are we doing next with the information? Right. What's the question?
Good,
Whatever.
no, I agree. I have the same question.
I mean, are we gonna post that on our website? Are we?
Well, what type of results do we get? Do we get a rating out of it, or just here's the questions and here's the responses?
Right.
You sort through it.
Yeah,
But if they say they support, you know, Donor Town, during that concept, I'm sure I'm not gonna ask that direct question, but if we get the answer that elicit that sort of answer, the question, what are we doing next with that information?
so it's a great question. I think we can go in a couple of different directions. You could do ratings, right? You could do a, you know, much like a score. You score candidates much like the BIA would do or others would do. On one end, that would be fairly forward. You know, at a minimum for me, collecting that data, when we get people that respond in a way that is favorable on all or most points to what you care about, then I think once we know they're in the general election, you know, we probably, you know, want to talk with them, you know, probably, you know, thank them. And then, you know, we have a group going into the legislature that is understanding of where you are, and we can use that. There'll be other messaging opportunities we could do during the general election to highlight those who understand this issue and that care about. But at a minimum, we'll collect data that will be, I think, important to use and have at our disposal January 2023. But I would envision some kind of engagement with them after the fact, before the election, just to let them know that it's not just a piece of mail they got, but there are
Right.
real people behind it, towns behind it. Thank them, make yourself available for questions, be a resource.
I said, two clarifying questions.
Yeah.
The first one is every interest group that does surveying doing the very same thing that we're doing right now? So the first day they declare the mailbox is full, and therefore it might be great to wait a
Yeah.
week, or we get ahead of the curve and we're not part of that mess. And then the second question is, in the manner what we use this information, is that how we get, I forget which House or Senate bill it was, but the no funding of lobbying. Right.
But I don't want
It's-
I don't want it to get revived.
Right.
Exactly. Is that the retribution you get for using the data?
Yeah, I don't think we want to make a list of who's naughty, who's nice. We don't want to do that. We need to stick to issues.
Yeah.
And then talk to those people that are supportive of our cause, make sure, maybe even reinforce that with them. And those that may be on the fence or opposed, see if we can get them to come to this up. But I don't think we want to be coloring people because they're on the other side. It's not what municipal governments generally organized
No, I
for. It's
wouldn't
an
want to
issue.
score them, right, I think the BIA is a little bit different than we
Right.
are, a lot different than we are.
Right.
Yeah.
They are out there being partisan to some
By
extent.
very
right?
nature, yes.
And by their nature, so I think it would be dangerous for us to score anyone and
Right.
put a score sheet on our website. I think that might be viewed
It's too far.
negatively.
Yeah.
And there are gonna be competing, there's a potential for competing interests, right? So we may score someone low because of the way they answered our survey, but there may be a member town of our group that's supporting that candidate for another reason. You know what I mean? It just, I don't want to get in the middle of that. And so I'm not even sure that posting the results would, I mean, we'd have to talk about that some more to see what we get for questions and what we get for results. But I'm a little bit uncomfortable even posting the results because those could be viewed as trying to support or be against certain candidates. So I think we gotta be careful.
Think you have to have some transparency. If you've asked the question,
Yeah.
you got.
Well, but
you got
that's
the
part of the
answers,
conversation.
But,
That's right.
and rating it
Yeah.
and doing weird things with it, maybe just posting it. Just
The raw data.
Right,
Yeah.
let people consume and make
Yeah.
their decisions.
Yeah.
However, but more importantly is calling in those that support us, say thank you.
That's right.
Messing them up, tag.
Absolutely.
It's intelligence gathering.
And then
Yeah.
the middle ground, hey, were you aware of?
Yeah.
Oh, I hadn't really thought of
Provide
that.
them with a
Right,
reader,
Right.
obviously, those that are
position paper, however.
on the far side, they're probably not gonna
Yeah.
move.
But at least you know. And so I think to your point, Sean, so I mean, there's a range of things, but what I'm hearing you say and what resonates with me, and I agree with you, is that this is really for internal intelligence gathering. So we can, people that are with you, we can thank them, we can message them up. Folks that are on the fence, we can advocate too, and folks who are on the other side, of us, we know.
We know. who
We know. And I think that's sufficient. But one thing, in terms of publishing the results, I have seen some advocacy groups do these surveys and indicate in there, we will not publish the results of this is private for our organization. That's not to say you're gonna, to your transparency point, share them with people who may be interested in the group, but we're not gonna post them on the website. We're not gonna make it a news item. We can think about how to structure that, but I think at core, it's an issue that legislators should expect to hear about and consider in 2023. So it won't be surprising to get a mailer asking where they might stand on a few of these issues.
And we could even highlight it in the introduction to the survey that there were X number of bills regarding education funding for our communities. This is a major issue, and so we're surveying.
Yeah.
are
Absolutely.
and on this issue. That way they know we're dealing with just that one thing.
To your point, you asked all about whether there's gonna be a flurry of these right off the bat. Um, that probably wouldn't dissuade me from doing it early. There'll be some. There are some on, the gun organizations typically will do a survey, whether it's the NRA or ONH or something like that, like that. It's not an overwhelming number of these. And so I think all things being equal, I suggest and recommend getting it out before we hit July 4th. And people are scattering to the four winds a little bit. And I do envision there could be some follow-up work we do. For those we don't hear from, we might just, we'll probably, hey, we reached out to you and we'd love to hear from you, that kind of thing. And a positive reinforcement, but there'll be some.
Generally, you put a deadline, don't you?
You try to.
People, I'll get to it.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend we insert, encourage you to reply no later than. So.
When we to know electoral candidates, obviously the governor himself, we actually have positions that we know of, that top term, we actually have that position.
So that's a great question. With the governor, I'd have to look. I mean, you can parse through what he has weighed in on as governor from a veto or a signature, but I don't think he's really been that outspoken on this in one way or the other. Senator Sherman has obviously taken votes that would, I think, give us intelligence of where he comes down on this and where he lives, and so that weighs in. I do anticipate, by the way, that Gary Hirschberg, the word that we hear is that he will likely run and will be a competitive primary on the Democratic side. He is a long opponent of an income tax, so that'll make for some interesting development. But on the governor, that's a great point. I don't believe he's ever really.
I think he's pretty good about his cards very close to the chest.
Yeah.
For the bill to get to his desk.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
I think that's right.
No, absolutely.
It's no better way to candidate that refuses or doesn't
That's
respond.
right. That's right. Because that piece of information could also.
Yeah.
And I like the idea of this will be shared among our coalition membership. Not a
Forward-facing data point.
forward-facing.
Yeah.
I think you have to face reality. It's distributed only to the members.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Someone
No,
will share
but-
it, somebody.
It's public document, it's not like- But we should tell them that we're not going to publicize it as an organization.
Yeah.
Do a press release.
I don't know that we need to set that. The information is part of our strategy that there are money from the other advocacy firms. Be able to know the side of the issue. I don't see the value of sending out to members of our community. I just don't, unless they're gonna lobby their local representatives, which they may or may not do. That would become an actual bill that's on the topic comes to play. I think for us, this is intelligent. We gotta find where our allies are. And we're advocates, but speak to those people.
Could, much like you'd see with like the top lines of a normal survey. If we did 8 questions, we could, prepare a document that says we received 294 responses. X percentage yes, X percentage no. You know what I mean? So it's kind of high level. Showing the crosstabs essentially.
Yeah, and I prefer that. Oh, no, we're gonna keep it close to the vest.
Yeah.
I think that at least some published and
Aggregated information.
Yeah, we can do
results
that.
will be shared with our
That's a good candidate way.
We can do that. So, well then, what I'll do is I'll begin fleshing out this draft so we can get it in the queue and hopefully get it signed off on by everybody. We have it well in advance of the filing period closing, so we can time it in such a way to get it out the door. We have time, but okay. Is this a good time, if I may? So Paul asked a question earlier today about any updates on the Conval lawsuit.
Which is the subset of what we're talking
Right.
about.
And so I,
Changes the complexion significantly of the shooter officer.
and so I had a paralegal in our office just take a quick peek at the docket today to see what that is, because there's been no news coverage.
Right.
There's been no, and it won't surprise you to learn, as I mentioned to Paul briefly, that there's been a lot of motion practice here and not much forward progress. So the state and the school districts have filed motions. This is going back to February of this year now. The state sought a motion to compel documents from the school districts. Districts opposed it. They went back and forth about it. There was a hearing on that motion to compel on March 9th. And my understanding is that's still under advisement by the court. So point being is they're in this back and forth.
Refresh my memory, it was remanded back to Superior.
That is correct.
Okay,
And it
they
followed,
avoided the overall motion to dismiss. And-
Right.
all so we're back into that stage.
and it was Judge Ruoff had it. He sat in Cheshire County. He was moved to Rockingham County last year. The case followed him to Rockingham. So it's actually in Rockingham Superior now. So that's the very short answer of where it is.
So
Motion hearing on a motion.
With best discoveries, the motion to compel.
Yeah.
But they'll have oral arguments if you're lucky by July or August, probably.
Yeah.
Maybe a decision.
Well,
I
a
think
decision
I'm-
on that by July or August, you're saying.
No, I'm saying they'll have to dispense with the motions, the preliminary motions, within the next month or two, and that will gear how quickly they actually hear have a hearing of the merits of the
Right.
case. And that will drive whenever they might have an opinion, which will then appeal. So we're definitely the next year's budget season.
What court's that in?
Rockingham Superior. Yeah, I think given the complexity and given that Judge Ruoff had it, they decided to keep it with him and move it with him.
He's
So,
thrilled about that.
He goes, I was almost away from it.
that's all I have, anything communication related.
Any other business?
Well, we were gonna talk about the invoicing. I double checked again.
Yeah.
After our last meeting, and yeah,
Okay.
2020 is the only equalized values still available.
Okay,
So
we'll stay with that.
that one.
That number,
Right, and I also, just before this meeting, just a quick run on what the full value reports are.
Mhm.
I sorted it two ways, one by total equalized value to get the top people.
Yeah.
And then those with the lowest tax rates, assuming that if you apply correlation between the two, those are probably the targeted people. I use Newington as an example. They're 15th in tax rates and so there we are. We're a good 30, I'd say, down the list in terms of total equalized value. Because that isn't necessarily the sole determinant, like Manchester's the highest list of equalized value, but because somebody, students in need, that
Right.
indicates everything, same thing with Nashua. The third one is Portsmouth. So that's where that correlation with Portsmouth is.
Mhm.
Portsmouth is 35th in tax rate, but the third in equalized value. Because you remember, this
Yeah.
was based more or less on the commission's model,
Mhm.
which may or may not be relevant. The
Right,
problem is, I don't know how else you gen out this list without using the commission's model, because then you have to
that's right.
interpolate somehow between lowest tax rates and highest values.
And we agreed that we were gonna use this model for the
For
2
years,
years,
right.
so I don't have any problem doing that. Is that the 2020 numbers?
Yes.
So how did that correlate to 19? Did you see if there were any significant changes in any of these?
Oh, I didn't do a
So here's
side-by-side
19,
comparison.
here's the 19 list.
Actually, no, that's the 2020.
Is it
I
2020?
I mislabeled,
Oh, okay,
right,
okay.
so
all
that
right.
was my fault.
So that is the one
That
we're
is the
gonna use
2020,
then.
right.
All right. So when I'm sending my email, this is,
I found
this
that.
is what I should ask. This is what I should
That's
ask
right.
Portsmouth to invoice.
What you have is, as long as it's the
We're,
March.
and we're using the 22 estimated
Right,
assessment.
right,
Because we're gonna stay with the 70.
because that relates to the budget
Yeah.
on the second.
Yeah. Yeah.
That we had.
Okay. And the 70,200 is our projected.
Was our projected budget. for
Yeah.
that.
Okay,
Yeah, I corrected everything but the header,
okay.
as
Okay.
usual.
Sean, your municipal audit bill, they recommended not to pass consent 18-0. So,
And that's, I think, come a lot from DRA, just trying, because there are so few communities that aren't, and school districts that aren't meeting, and everybody else is, so. Just trying to put some pressure on.
Yeah, I don't think it's reverse shouting to us either way. I mean, it does tell people what the actual amount of money that's left over in the school district. Reduce taxes.
Okay, any other, so we're gonna use this list and
Yeah,
anything
can I
else?
just double
Yeah,
check
yeah.
that one more
Yeah.
time?
When are they gonna bill? What's,
Uh, I gotta talk to Judy. She's probably in the midst of her budget, right? for June. So I'll get with her as soon as I can.
There's a small discrepancy, maybe. I feel more comfortable to use that one.
This stuff.
Right. I don't know that it really changes much, a dollar here, dollar there, but for the sake of accuracy, you can have that and use that one.
I think what I'll also do with that, when I send the invoices, is we will send an up-to-date financial report about what we have spent, just so the communities know where we are.
That one. Has Portsmouth been giving you that
Yeah,
regularly?
yeah, and I'm sorry, I usually run that off to give it to you guys. I'll have it at the next meeting, but there's nothing.
Or just email it to
Where,
us.
yeah, I'll email it to you. There's nothing. All right,
what are you doing with minutes now? You wait until next meeting, is that?
yeah, there weren't minutes ready for today from March, so we'll do both
Okay.
March and this meeting in May,
the next meeting is May 24th,
May 25th.
be here again, so. That'll be in the middle of committee conference week, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right,
We'll know what's the last remaining week which you have to be sifted out.
Exactly. That'll be the sausage making.
How is, I haven't tracked or heard anything reported. How has the governor's signature or veto, is there any backlogs? I've been seeing strips and drafts of stuff that
There-
they
there've been a-
signed. I haven't seen much about these vetoes.
There's not been a lot. They haven't announced many bill signings. There have been a few. There was a veto in the most recent House calendar veto message. But not been a ton. So that'll change
Because
shortly.
that always can be a surprise
Mhm.
too. You thought it was a done deal.
Yeah.
Oops. Like distributing. Let's see where that goes.
Yeah.
Motion adjourned.
All right.
Second.
All right, and a second, so we are adjourned. Thank you very much, Matt.